Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes their organizations thrive and how they influence the society. I'm your host, Marla Moody, and I have come from the nonprofit world and really excited to teach people about lessons and encourage people. We have a wonderful opportunity today to interview Mark Dhooge. He is the president and CEO in Florida of Kids in Distress. Mark, would you give a quick intro? And we're so excited to have some conversation with you today.
Absolutely. And Marla, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be able to be interviewed by you, given your experience, especially internationally. So my name is Mark. I've been the president and CEO here at Kids in Distress, as well as our affiliate Family Central for the last 14 years. But I've been with the organization for 32 years. Kids in Distress is a regional nonprofit in South Florida. We're based in Fort Lauderdale, but have offices in Miami as well. We impact over 20,000 children with a mission that is stated to prevent child abuse, preserve the family, and provide treatment to children who are impacted by abuse, abandonment, and neglect. We do that through three distinct pillars: our foster care and child welfare pillar, our early childhood education pillar, and then our community-based family support pillar. Really, our goal is to go upstream and try to impact families and children at a very young age to avoid costly foster care placements, juvenile justice intervention, and to really start children out on the right foot regarding their social, academic, and behavioral future.
Now, how did you even venture into this world of really advocating for children?
That's a really interesting question, Marla. My undergrad is an interesting combination of criminal justice, biology, and conservation. I went to school wanting to save the animals, right? A conservation position was not in my future when I graduated from college at Northern Michigan University, and I attended a police academy. So I didn't go into conservation, but landed a law enforcement job very early on. I was only 21 years old. I did law enforcement for about 2.5 years. But one of the things that I found that really set the stage and the foundation for my entire career is that at an early young age, I was able to create and maintain relationships with some of the younger kids in our community, the juveniles, the kids that were getting in trouble. As a police officer, many of those interactions, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, lead to an arrest. I sent a lot of kids down to juvenile justice facilities in Detroit and Flint. When those children came back, they were gang affiliated and had drug involvement. And quite honestly, they were worse when they came back to our community. So after about 2.5 years of law enforcement, I kind of hung up my badge and I moved into a group home, a Boys Town group home, with the same adolescents that were being reintegrated back into our community, and lived with them, mentored them, provided behavioral and clinical intervention to them at that time. It kind of set the stage for really doing some upstream philosophy. How do we work with children, with youth, with young adults to try to change the trajectory of their lives by mentoring and creating positive relationships with them and driving them to alternatives so that they wouldn't get involved? And I had the wonderful opportunity in 1994 to meet the executive director. Her name was Jean Miley. I'm here at Kids in Distress. I won a national award in San Antonio, and they told me they're doing work with young children down here in Fort Lauderdale. At that time, I'm like, oh my gosh, if we could only have intervened with those adolescents when they were 5 and 6 and 7 years old. And so I packed up a U-Haul and drove to Fort Lauderdale. I then moved into a group home here at Kids in Distress, opened one of our new homes in 1994. The home was designed for children that were in foster care that had been through multiple failed placements. Foster care was very broken in the 1990s, so many of these boys had gone through 14 different foster care placements before they landed with us. And our job, very similar to those teenagers, was to mentor, create relationships, but more than not, to really provide a level of trust for those kids who had been thrown out under any other situation, and to let them know that they were loved, to let them know that they were going to be cared for, that they could be kids again. So I did that for another 2 years, and then had the opportunity to really rise through the ranks of our organization. And again, that upstream philosophy has always been at the center of my career. I'm trying to intervene. Even now, the most programs that we have are programs that try to keep kids out of those group homes and out of foster homes. I like to use the analogy that many years ago we were standing at a riverbank, and there was children, flowing down the river. We were skilled rescuers. You were going to jump in the river, save all these kids, and make sure that they were all right. What we learned very fast is that resources are never going to be complete enough to be able to provide a safety net for all those children that were floating down the river. So we decided to go upstream. Back when going upstream was not popular, intervening with families from a maternal health perspective. How can we meet with moms before the children are born? How can we intervene with families before they come to the attention of the Floor Abuse Hotline? That upstream philosophy has really engaged us in so many ways to keep kids out of foster care. 15 years ago, there was 3,000 kids in foster care in our community. Now there's only 900 in licensed care. I truly believe that interventions like our organization, as well as our partners who have gone upstream and provided support to families, have made that difference.
That's incredible. There was really that belief that you don't start where people are bad. You go up and find the source of the disruption and really hit it there. That for me feels very visionary. What does it look like to believe something like that? We can go upstream to even before they're born and really work through that. What kind of pushback did you get? How did you keep that vision alive to make it happen?
Our mission used to be just to provide treatment to children impacted by abuse and neglect. When we started to essentially evolve our mission into prevention and preservation of the family, we actually lost half of our board members. We built this huge shelter on our campus that at one point 75 kids lived here. You'd go into our baby shelter and there would be, 40 babies impacted by drug abuse. So they were born substance exposed, impacted by HIV, have been brutally physically abused. And when we started to launch our foster care program in the early 2000s, my belief is that children belong with families. They don't belong in an institution. Some kids, that's the only choice, especially teenagers. They belong maybe in a group home that is family style. But we moved all of those babies into foster homes. So board members and some of our supporters, even donors, would come in and say, well, where's all the babies? And we're like, those babies belong with a family, even if that family is a surrogate, a relative caregiver or a foster family, a pre-adoptive family. They don't belong in a shelter. So the pushback that we received from board members, from donors, even, believe me, this was a big trajectory change, because I could take a donor into our shelter and they'd be throwing money at you because everybody wants to see babies. Now our babies are in homes with families, but guess what? The success rate of those children is upwards of 100 times, 200 times, because they're not in a group facility. We had a wonderful staff member, but a child going to bed with a bedtime story and then waking up with a totally different caregiver the next morning is really not conducive to normal childhood development. Children need that consistency. They need that continuity of one caregiver who can provide that care, love, and attention. And that's how children thrive. So yeah, there was a lot of pushback very early on for, kind of where we were, where our organization was heading.
It's interesting, Mark. I can tell you're an extreme sports person because that was an extreme situation. To be clear on seeing better results and having that as your value. But I heard pushback from staff, from board of directors, from donors. Those are all people that have influence and should have influence, but weren't aligned with your new vision. And the courage it takes to say, we're going for best results, not for where I'm going to get funded.
Yep. Yep.
As I see that a lot of times overseas when we're doing work, is people throw money into things that make them feel good.
Yes.
And that's not bad, right? I mean, I get benefit from giving, right? I give benefit from saying, I give this and I feel better. But what we want to do is make societal change.
Yes. Yep.
What type of messaging did you focus on during that time when you were really shifting your directives and your plan?
That's a great question, Marla. And what we started to focus on was metrics. How are we measuring change? So it's very difficult to measure a foster care placement because longitudinal change takes years to study, to evaluate. I'll give you an example of a program that we launched. It was around 2011. It was a housing program, a demonstration project. We secured funding, very, very significantly. Went to the federal government and said, hey, let's do a study on the effects of housing and how it impacts a child coming into foster care. If we provide stable housing to a family, are we going to be able to change that trajectory where a family is now stable? We proved it along with 6 other demonstration sites. We use data in a lot of ways to start to convince and to change the mindset of our board, donors, constituents, to show them how positive these changes actually were. We're using metrics and we're engaging our local, not only philanthropic community, but also our local institutions of higher learning to kind of engage them and say, hey, would you guys be able to come in and study this project, this program, this service? And then what that translated into was a dialogue of us being able to say, we're doing storytelling of actual case studies, but now we're combining that with data that shows how successful these programs really were. It changed the narrative to folks really see that one of the tragic things about prevention services is that they're very hard to measure. You have to look at a point in time that is further than most people can see. For example, my favorite programs that we have now are our maternal health programs. You're intervening prenatally and at birth before children are even born. You have some people say, you lose contact with those families 5, 6, 7 years down the road. The most important thing that we can do is maintain contact with those families. Internally, you're never going to have 100%, but we probably maintain 60% contact with our maternal health programs by offering groups, by doing peer-led interventions. We have a grandma in our our kinship program, dealing with relative caregivers, who's been affiliated with our program since 2006. Miss Brown is one of our first grandmas. Her child is now graduated from high school and in college. He was like 8 or 9 years old when she came to us for help. But we now have her as a peer-led support for our support groups. And we encourage families, stay in touch with us, come to our support groups, because you don't only have stressors when a child is born. Kids have stressors when they go to school. And then believe me, when they're 13, when I was a parent and my child was 14, 15, I was going through a lot of stress. But we maintain and make sure once they touch our mission, once they touch our programs, not every family does this, but we're going to be a support for life. You can always reach out to us, and if you have an issue, call us first. And if we don't have a program, we'll find one for you. We call it one of our core values, tenacity. You do whatever it takes to help a family. And, and we're pretty grounded in those core values because I believe that culture is so important in a nonprofit. You have to have a culture of support, of humility, a culture of not only doing good, but making sure that you're going above and beyond of doing good to not give up.
I love those values. It sounds like they're values that aren't just written on the wall, but they're lived out each day. 2 little points is one is not only keeping in touch with people who have come through the system, both the kids and the adults associated with the kids, for statistics, but also for that longevity of success. And I love that this grandma that came to you for help, is how you put it, is now a mentor, is now helping others. So there is that of giving back, and what better people to do it than who have had that experience of, I need help. This is rough. So I love that involvement for the sake of the program, for the sake of the individuals and the families, and just how great it feels really to say, I have something to offer.
Yes. Yep.
And the other piece is statistics. Getting analytics is hard, and you alluded to that in many ways, especially when it comes to people, right? The best statistics are those that are passive, where you just gather clicks or whatnot. But some of the statistics you're doing, like if I give prenatal help, how is that kid in high school? I mean,
Right.
that takes determination, tenacity, as you said. And also, if we don't have that, it's just the stories.
Yes.
And as important as stories are, because that brings the emotional piece with it, if stories aren't backed by data, then the best storyteller wins.
Hmm. So incredibly true. Every program that we have is filled with outcomes. Whether you're using instruments or whether you're using social interaction, meaning how successful was this child in elementary school? How successful was this family that they didn't have a subsequent abuse report? Did this family stay intact? Because you also have measurements based on service provision, right? You use an AAPI or you use a stress index, or you want to make sure that your programmatic implementation is also successful, but it's your longitudinal study over time and those life markers, for lack of a better word, that really measure whether you were a success long term. And that's research and development. A lot of people don't pay for research and development, but it's critically important to have some kind of system in a nonprofit to ensure that funding is sustained over time.
You also mentioned not that you don't use government in many ways, but also to be untethered by that so that there's some independence with that as well. So I've heard, in light of really clear communication, especially as you shifted to such a less walked path, you had statistics, you have stories, you had kind of different pieces, but how did you message things in order to keep as many people as possible? And when did you say, you know what, it's better if this person goes to a different organization, serves in a different way because they're muddying the waters? Like, because part of clear communication is not having dissension, and you need dissension or hard conversation to get to a clearer goal. So, love to hear
Marla,
some of that.
loaded question. I think dissension is healthy in an organization. One of our core values is trust, right? It doesn't matter if you're working with a family, a client, or you're working with your own team members. That level of trust is so incredibly important throughout the organization. It really sets the foundation and has to run through the fabric of your culture. Our culture is very, very strong. About 80% of our leadership team has been with our organization 18 years or more. I've been here 32 years.
Wow.
That's a strong indication that you're preserving your core values, your culture, your thought process. Your thought leaders are in place to be able to make sure that they have input, which is also critically important. One of the things that we do monthly is we have an orientation. This is very simple, but a lot of organizations don't do this. I make sure that I am the first person at our orientation every month to talk about not only our history, but our culture, our expectations. What's interesting about like turnover is that very few people who do not believe in our culture last more than about 6 months. We have very good retention rates, very low attrition rates. We want to have people in our organization who develop trust, want to work with their colleagues to be change agents so they're involved in the organization, go the extra mile to ensure that not only families have assistance, but that colleagues have support. When you have that running through the veins of the entire organization, usually when folks come in, they decide rather quickly that, I want work-life balance. Well, in this work, it's hard to have work-life balance. Do we encourage it? Absolutely. I climb mountains all the time. That's my work-life balance. I work out, I climb mountains, but I'm also, when I'm on, and I'm fully
Yeah.
engaged in our team
Yeah.
members and in our mission. I don't know if that answers your question, but it kind of provides a framework for who we are as an organization.
Yeah, I have this dynamic leadership framework, and it starts with culture, which is values and action. And culture eats strategy for lunch, right?
Every
It's just like, and so what I'm hearing is you have such a rich, strong, focused culture that it retains the right people that are right for your culture, and it makes it clear faster for people who are like, yeah, this isn't my digs. So love that. And burnout is, I think, one of the number one ugly underbellies of nonprofits. I saw it in myself. I
Mhm.
see it all the time. Leaders overworking people because it's such a passion. You don't know when to start and stop. But what I've heard you say is you go and hike mountains. When you're hiking mountains, you truly are away from it. You're engaging your body in a different way. You're getting out in nature. You said you encourage others to find those rest ways. So it's not about work life balance is a weird thing, and I'd love to talk about that more. But it isn't sometimes as obvious as if you worked for a for profit company. And also, if you don't find health by resting, whatever resting means, you will come with burnout, which is a dangerous thing for those that you serve.
Yeah.
How are ways that you have seen burnout, either in yourself or others, and what have you done about it?
Marla, it's something that we talk about probably weekly in our leadership team. As a matter of fact, I'll go back to the orientation, is that the last part of my orientation, I talk about two things that have nothing but everything to do about our mission, right? And the work that our people
Right.
do. The first thing I talk about is ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Not that our team members are going to face children who have high ACEs scores, right? That's a given. That's the work that we do. But the fact that many of them and their colleagues also have high ACEs scores. My ACEs score is 8. I have a very high ACEs score. And when I talk
Wow.
to our colleagues, that's the reason why many people come into, especially a human services nonprofit. They want to
Mm-hmm.
help people, they want to help children because they might have been through circumstances themselves that adversely impacted their relationships, how they function on a day-to-day basis, their mental health. I gradually move into how important it is for them to take care of themselves mentally, physically, psychologically, emotionally. I talk about that. Number one, you have to drive that yourself. There's generational change impacting our sector significantly. My wife is a CEO of a nonprofit as well. We come from a system of nonprofits where you give everything, right? We work 70 hours a week. You do whatever it takes. And the next generation, our son who's 30, high school teacher, he has boundaries. When he goes home, he doesn't want to be on call anymore. I'm on call 24/7, 365 days a year. I could be hiking a mountain in Spain and I might get a call, and I have, and I take that call. But the next generation is not focused on that. So when I speak with our new employees, I talk about our employee assistance program, about having a mechanism for when you're not on duty that allows you
Yeah.
to take care of your own physical needs, because you are only as good helping as how healthy you are. I go to extremes. I lift every single day. It's how I deal with stress. But theirs could be knitting, going to the shelter and petting animals, going for a walk. We talk about an orientation. I make people think and even write down. When you're in a stressful situation, you've now put in 80 hours of work with some very tough families. What are you going to go home and do to take care of that? Diet and exercise is so critically important. Social connection. Also, you can't go home and talk about work. My wife and I, both of us in human service nonprofits, we have to put limits on the amount of time that we talk, about work, because otherwise that's all that's driving your relationship. So
Yeah.
we talk about that throughout our leadership team members. How are our leaders mentoring our team members? Because longevity in this field is purely based on that burnout. I'm retiring next September, and my wife is as well. We feel that, number one, we've kind of gotten to a point where government funding only pays for about 80% of what we do. That's
Mm-hmm.
not a nonprofit. You're raising money, to make up that gap. I think from a bureaucratic and a political standpoint, when you're dealing with that grind every single day, and I know you've been there probably on a larger basis, some of the international work that you've doing, you feel sometimes that the resources are not always there compared to what you really want to accomplish. And it can get overwhelming to a point where you don't even become functional because the worry for your team, for your clients, or the people you serve starts to wane because you cannot fulfill maybe all the promises that you've made. Now, we deal with burnout here head on. In social services and nonprofits, it's a very normal evolution of one's career. You're going to
Yeah.
go through ups and downs. How you deal with that and what tools the organization provides to its employees to ensure that they can not only deal with it head on, but that they can more importantly overcome it. That is
Yes.
really, really important. We have a very rich EAP program, employee assistance program. We have a relationship with another organization where our team members can have 5, 6, 7 free therapy sessions. That's unheard of in a lot of places. It's still confidential. I refer people to EAP all the time because, hey, it's somebody to talk to. It's important to have those resources. The other piece is having a very flexible work environment. Again, I'm not a big believer in work from home because culture can be impacted if people are away from their peers significantly. But you also have to have a system of flexibility because, our work doesn't stop. It's 24/7. So you have to maintain that flexibility, not only for service provision, but for the health of the team that are the hands and feet of your mission.
So you mentioned not working at home, which of course COVID has done radical changes, both positive and negative. Like the positive is the realization that we can do this conversation virtually
Mm-hmm.
and it's still rich.
Yeah.
It, back in the day that was less likely, but the concept of working from home is a big deal and it's a challenging piece. How have you brought that to your employees, especially the younger generation? What are some of the conversations you've had maybe around helping that happen?
We try to provide a flexible work environment whenever possible. And our programs span 35 distinct programs. Some of our programs are preschool, for example. You can't work from home and be a preschool teacher. Doesn't work, right? That being said, 60 to 70% of what we do are community-based programs. So those are team members who have an office here on our main campus or in our office in Miami, but 80% of the time they are in the community working with families. We don't do a lot of outpatient work. We don't have families come to us. We go to them to concentrate on where they're at. Before the pandemic, it was all office-based, but after the pandemic, we worked from home for a couple of years. One of the things that we instituted right away was weekly meetings during the pandemic. We had weekly staff meetings on Zoom. Everybody had to turn their camera on. And we would bring in guest speakers. We brought in people to just encourage our team. Those weekly meetings were critically important to make sure that we just saw each other scream face to face. Shortly after, we actually noticed that there started to be cracks in our culture. One of the ways that I noticed that right away is that I pride myself in knowing the first name of every team member in the organization. I started to lose that when I was only seeing people on the screen. When I would meet with them in orientation on the screen, I'd see them in person. I'm like, that didn't even look like the same person. I mean, right. So what we did is probably 2 years after the start of COVID, we told our team, you need to be in the office more than you're out of the office. Meaning that, and for our community folks, that means that they had to be in the office at least one day a week to meet with their supervisor face to face. We were not going to do Zoom supervision because you lose a lot of the emotion, a lot of the connection. Mm-hmm. Trust is a core value. Compassion is a core value. Those kind of core values are only sustained when it's face to face. Human connection is so important. When you look at Maslow's hierarchy needs, yes, food, water, shelter, human connection is also a foundation. Human connection doesn't happen through a screen. It can, but I don't think it's as successful. We moved to this in the office more than you're out of the office. But that being said, we were flexible. We told people, you choose what day it is, as long as you're accomplishing, the goals associated with your position. And it's been very beneficial. Also, the flexibility helps our team, but at the same time, even the new workforce, the new folks, why can't I be 100% remote? Why? Because there are things you're going to get on campus that you will not get if just by the screen.
Yeah, those water cooler conversations. I'm one that loves working from home. It was hard to go in the office, especially because I have so many virtual meetings. And yet it was those conversations when I went to go get coffee or when I just ran into someone in the hall that would have never happened.
Yes.
Because of that. This is a podcast not only to encourage, but also to learn from. If someone was going to take off the hood of your organization and kind of see under the hood, what weaknesses would you not want them to see?
What a loaded question. A personal example is, and it has to do with burnout. CEOs, leaders have to wear many, many hats, right? I pride myself in mentoring our team. I love spending time with our team. I love hearing their stories. The only way I can communicate their stories, our story as an organization, to donors and to other constituents is by learning from them and hearing the impact that they've made. So all that being said, in my last couple of years, I'm more engaged internally than externally. I don't like to engage in those political conversations. I see it all as bureaucracy that, is very negative in so many ways because there's just so much infighting. And so our agency doesn't engage in some of those critical relationships with some of those political affiliated processes that I think some nonprofits do in order to gain marketing, support, dollars. The other has to do more with infrastructure. We're a very, very healthy organization financially. But there comes a time when you've built and built and built, and now you have to sustain through capital
Yes.
expenses what you've built. So if you open the hood of the organization right now, many people come in and they go, oh my gosh, this is Disney World. Donors will come in and they'll go, my gosh, this organization already has everything. And they're less likely to invest in the organization because we are very much like a well-oiled machine and our campus is beautiful. The problem is that when you have an aging campus and an aging building, you have to replace roofs, replace air conditioners. I think few people in the nonprofit space, when they're not in the nonprofit space, do not look at nonprofits as a business. We have balance sheets, we have cash flow. The only difference between us and an enterprise business is that we invest additional dollars back into our mission. Nobody's taking profit sharing here. Doesn't exist in nonprofits where that's the, in enterprise that exists. We constantly have to be able to go to our donors to make ends meet with some of those capital expenses. That's probably our biggest and greatest challenge at this point. Our greatest asset is always going to be our people, despite the fact that we look like Disney World, because of our culture, because of who we are, and because of an amazing leadership team. With a lot of tenure. But the fact is, you still have to have other infrastructure in order to sustain the business. We're going to have to, at some point, not only invest in that, but seek out the resources necessary to ensure that that gets done.
Well, kudos to you for working on a well-run organization that serves people and yet really thinks through doing it as a business. Business sounds like a kind of a bad word sometimes with nonprofits.
Right.
Business simply means being efficient and effective, being legal, and
Yes.
also being able to better invest in the people that we're serving. So
100%
business
correct.
is not a bad word. Before I let you go, you alluded to the fact that you and your wife are going to retire soon. I have two questions around there. The first one is, what is something that you're hoping to accomplish before you hand the keys over?
Wow, great question. I think the most important thing that I can leave as a legacy is to turn the keys over to another leader to ensure that we're a sustainable organization. We're not, even though we're approaching a transition, that we're not giving up on opportunity. Let's weigh that up. Give an example is that we had another organization that came to us that would like to combine resources, whether we acquire them or we take them as a program. I think there's some organizations and some leaders that would say, we're in a big transition. We'll wait. We don't wait on opportunities in our organization, regardless of the changes that are occurring within. We also have a very big request for proposals for a contract of services that could be a $1.5 million program. We have about a $47 million budget. So, 1.7, that's significant. You're looking at, a 5% of your budget. We're not going to pass up on that. We're still going to apply for that. I see the most important part of my transition of sustaining a very, like you said, efficient organization, a very positive, optimistic organization, and making sure that that change and that onboarding of that new leader is not only successful, but that they have all my support in going through that process. I think that's going to be critical as we move forward into the next generation of leaders in our organization. And quite honestly, when we do reach that point, that I also have the humility to step aside. This is the new leader, and I will provide a level of support, but I won't provide a level of dictation. I'm not going to say, you will do this, this is what you should do. I'm very excited for this change in our organization because I think some of us that have been in nonprofits for a long time are unwilling to admit that, your vision for the future has sort of been stymied. And we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast, we've made very significant changes in evolution of our organization. We just opened a new center in Miami a year ago. That was kind of my last big project. I'm very excited to see what's next for our organization. Yeah. Kind of brought it to a level that I feel is beyond me. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's next. Now somebody needs to take the reins and run with them full speed and do what's next for our organization. Yeah. That takes a degree of humility that I think some leaders don't have. They're not willing to change their position.
Yes, I strongly agree with that. If our goal truly is the embetterment of whatever our focus is, There's times when we really press in and invest a certain way. There's times as leaders, it's time to step to the side to give a different set of eyes, a different focus, maybe more energy, depending on where we're at in life. I've stepped aside a few different times in my career, knowing that the next person can take it to a different level. It doesn't diminish what you've done. In fact, it just celebrates it. That humility of saying we can get to these goals in so many different ways. So founder syndrome, right? That you
Mm-hmm.
are there so long that there's not change. Now, what I've seen with you is the boldness to make change, and I see a very organic, lively situation. So you haven't let status quo stagnate you, and
Right.
yet you're ready to see a new person come in with different fresh ideas. As you've looked back in your career, what is something either to encourage a new leader of what you've done well or what you maybe would have done differently?
Marla, I think it's very simple. I spoke with another executive director, CEO yesterday from an organization called Be Strong International. We're talking about imposter syndrome, right? And I said, one of the things that I'm most concerned about as I leave is that all these people are going to find out what I didn't do. You know what I mean? As a leader in this organization, I would say that as a leader, I think everybody kind of does not challenge themselves enough. They step in and they go, oh my gosh, I'm not so sure if I can do this or not, or am I really the right role for this? I would, say, stay humble. That's the catalyst that leads to an evolution in your leadership journey and your
Yeah.
organization's journey is being able to say that I'm not the end all be all. You know what I mean? I'm never going to be that. And kind of what goes along with that is to really understanding that your people have the solutions, being able to empower your team, being able to listen. I think far too many leaders don't just sit down in a chair and listen to their team members. Oftentimes, our team members, they know the solutions, know what the goal is supposed to be, what they need to do. It's just a matter of being able to listen and frame it for them and let it talk them through. Never be in a position as a leader where you think that you have all the answers and that people just need to come to you and you'll figure it out and tell them what to do. Oftentimes, I have the answer in my head, but I'm
Hmm.
not going to tell them.
Right.
Why? Because it's so much better and so much more positive. And I have my favorite quote is a quote by Colin Powell. Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. And being able to engage your team in optimistic, positive conversation and let them come to the solution is far more powerful than anyone realizes. It's very simple in concept. It's not so simple to do.
Well, I'm going to close it there. Thank you for your time. If someone wants to be a part of what you're doing, how could they?
The best way is to our website, www.kidinc.org, www.kidinc.org. If you want employment, if you want to look at our mission, we have 3 amazing signature events every single year. Want to get involved in volunteering? There's lots of ways to intersect with our organization. Everything there is on the website. We're, of course, on all social media outlets as well. When my social media is also filled with organizational stuff and my adventures. So look me up, look our agency up. Would love anybody, if they want to volunteer or be engaged with us, we would welcome them into our mission.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. You enjoy this coming season. I'm excited to see how you're continue to be used throughout your life.
Thank you, Marla. It's been such an honor and a pleasure to chat with you.
It's great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.